And then he got very fuzzy because, of course, he basically admitted that it's the Karzai allies and U.S. allies without coming out and naming names, because that's obviously very dangerous for a guy who relies on those very forces for the protection of his office and the future of his career. So it shouldn't come as any surprise, then, the events of the last couple of days with the elections in Afghanistan. Because, you know, today they announced the government is going to call for a recount of ballots in 7 provinces. There was massive vote fraud. There was massive vote fraud in the last presidential election. Why should a country that relies on the drug trade, where the top leaders are the drug dealers, be any different when it comes to, shall we say, influencing elections? The basic contradiction in the elections in Afghanistan is that they are not being held in order to promote democracy and power-sharing civil society in Afghanistan. They're mainly being held to convince us here in the United States and people in other parts of the world that it's worth continuing the fight in Afghanistan. That's what the election's all about. And they're not actually doing a very good job of that, because as the elections become more and more blatantly fraudulent, it has the opposite effect. People become less supportive of the war. And as a matter of fact, for some time now, the majority of opinion in the United States has been against the war in Iraq, and the majority of opinion in the United States has been against the war in Afghanistan. You know, we're spending $1 million per year per soldier to fight in Afghanistan and Iraq. $1 million per soldier. That's right currently now. 50 million soldiers, sorry, 50,000, okay, 50,000 soldiers in Iraq, 100,000 soldiers in Afghanistan, 150,000 total, $150 billion a year. Now, what could this country do in the way of decent health care and education and seniors, etc., with $150 billion? And that's just for the immediate expenses for keeping the troops abroad. That's not counting the bloated military budget in general. So, and most Americans are starting to get that. They didn't in the beginning, because it was this hype about the war on terrorism and 9/11, and we were all threatened, etc., etc. But most Americans are starting to get that, and that's why the war in Afghanistan remains unpopular, and I think will continue to do so. It's not a winnable war, and we can go into more detail if you want to in question and answer, but it's not a winnable war. It's a war that will only make, you know, sooner or later, all the U.S. troops are going to have to get out. There will be a negotiated settlement. There will be some kind of a coalition government that emerges. And the only question is, how many American troops, how many Afghan civilians, how many innocent people are going to continue to die until that settlement is finally reached. I mentioned that the U.S. government promotes a lot of fear to justify the wars going on there. Well, we all remember 9/11. And now the Bush administration declared the war on terrorism. And it's being carried forward, not in those words, but basically the same ideas, the same concepts are being carried forward by the Obama administration, unfortunately, despite promises to the contrary when he was running. And what has happened is that anybody who opposes U.S. policy and uses violence is suddenly labeled a terrorist, whether they are or they are not. Whether they're engaged in a liberation or an anti-colonial or an anti-imperialist or a national liberation war, or whether they're religious fanatics, or whether they're Basque separatists, or whether they're Marxist guerrillas in Colombia, they're all lumped together as terrorists. And it's in a very conscious, intentional misrepresentation of the facts in order to get people very, very scared. So let's take the example of Iran. I've been in Iran 4 times. I was there at during the fraudulent presidential elections last year, when 1 million+ people marched in the streets of Tehran and other major cities around Iran. Now, as far as the U.S. government is concerned, and this was true under Bush, and unfortunately it continues to be the same under Obama, the issue is not what kind of government would be best for the people of Iran, but it's their nuclear weapons program. That's the issue. And despite all the evidence to the contrary, that's the message that we get from the government, relayed through the major media, down through the minor media, and so on. What's the reality? Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. It's as simple as that. They do not have one. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the body that has inspectors on the ground in Iran, has never said that Iran has a nuclear weapons program. They've raised all kinds of questions. They say there's unanswered questions.